Oh, I just enjoyed spending time with people. I was impressed with the BV University facilities, and I had never been to Byron, so of course that was really fun as well. But and the cobblestone ballroom. I mean, it was nice to get introduced to some of the local history because I'd been to Storm Lake, but I'd never spent any real time in Storm Lake.
Yeah, it's a great little town.
It
All
is.
right, all right. Looks
Okay.
like we have a quorum, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey.
Yeah, all right. Oh, Chuck's coming. That's always good. So, this crowd does not need much of an introduction to Laura Belin, but I always need to keep in mind that there are people, plenty of people, who listen to these podcasts, and some of them will not know that the great Laura Belin is probably one of the best political analysts of Iowa politics. And she is covering the legislature and has been up there morning, noon, and night throughout this session. And we're delighted to have her as our guest today. So, Laura, without further ado, let's just get right into this. What are the key takeaways for you from this legislative session, and what do we need to know and how it's going to impact little old us?
Well, there's still the House and Senate Republicans are still not on the same page about some things, especially the property taxes, which seems like the main thing that's going to be hanging them up for the next week or two. And, in the 10th year of a trifecta, I've seen almost every year some level of deterioration in the relationship between the House and the Senate Republicans. And I was looking this year to see whether it would be any better with a new Senate Majority Leader, Mike Klimisch, but I think it's only marginally better. So they also haven't agreed to do anything on eminent domain. I think that's probably just not going to happen. The budget they seem to be kind of close on. And I think Kim Reynolds, as a lame duck, she just seems to be much less influential in the legislature than she used to be. So those would be my biggest takeaways. I mean, they're still trying to pass. There are a lot of smaller bills that haven't gotten a lot of attention that they're trying to pass, like an abortion medication bill and a few other things that I'm keeping my eye on. But biggest issues, property taxes, state budget, and eminent domain.
Okay. Well, I'm sure people have a lot of questions, so let's just get right to the audience and
Absolutely.
see
And
what.
I can take any questions about the elections as well, because it's probably the most interesting election cycle in Iowa that I've ever covered, that with so many competitive races, state and federal.
What stands out to you this time?
Well, we haven't, this is the first time since 1968, which was before I was born, that we have an open Senate race and an open governor's race in the same year. So that automatically makes them very competitive, or more competitive than they normally would be. Of course, the governor's race is much more competitive than the Senate race, at least as I see it. But we have at least two, and I think arguably three of the four US House races highly competitive. And I think some of the statewide elections as well, the attorney general's race I'm watching closely. We always have a lot of competitive state legislative races. There are some interesting Republican primaries coming up on June 2nd for state legislature. So it's just like, it's almost like, what am I not interested in? More than it's easier to say than what I am interested in.
Well, while we're talking about the political races, who are the winners in terms of their finance disclosure reports this go around?
Oh, well, we only had reports for the federal candidates, so
Right.
Senate and House. So the state level candidates are going to report in midway May. So Christina Bohannon and Sarah Trone Garrett both outraised the Republican incumbents. And I mean, they outraised them in total dollars raised, but especially if you look at the individual donations, Marionette Miller Meeks and Zach Nunn were really propped up a lot by PAC contributions and what are called transfers from other committees, so leadership committees sending money their way. So if you just look at the individual donations, the Republican incumbents are way behind, which I think points to a grassroots enthusiasm problem. So they that's an issue. In the Senate race, Josh Turek and Zach Walz, both very competitive. Both of them are going to, whoever wins the primary is going to go into the general election way behind Ashley Hinson. She has a commanding lead in fundraising and she's been able to stockpile. She hasn't been spending that much money because although she does have a primary challenger, it's not really a competitive primary. I mean that her primary challenger has raised less money than a lot of candidates for state legislature do. And in the second congressional district, that's the Northeast Iowa one, Joe Mitchell, the overwhelming favorite in the Republican primary. And then it's a pretty competitive Democratic race. I would say probably Lindsey James is favored, but Clint Tweetball also has raised quite a bit of money for that Democratic primary up there. And then Kathy Dalter, kind of far behind, long shot.
Okay. All right. Who has a question, Chuck? Let's start with you, as is
Good
our
morning.
tradition.
Good morning, Laura. Good morning, Julie. Great to see you again. Laura, I'm just asked this question about a member of the session or legislature who I have not met, and I've really been curious about, I guess in the last 3 or 4 years, in his impact and activism on education and particularly higher education in Iowa, and that's Taylor Collins, who I think is a Republican state representative from Mediapolis, maybe
Yeah,
down in
Louisa County. Yeah, his
it.
district is Louisa County, lots of Des Moines County outside Burlington. Yep.
I see him as the I have I and tell me if I'm wrong on this. I have seen him as the arch activist against DEI in Iowa, um, and he has almost attack on expertise at the Regents institutions. I mean, that's how I'm reading him, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on
No,
that.
I
I
think
have,
that's a fair assessment.
and the other thing that he stepped way out of bounds on, I thought this past year, and I don't know what the outcome of this was. Sometime maybe a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, he wrote a letter to Marty Martin, the president of Drake, in demanding that he explain Marty, the president of Drake, explain to this legislator what the university's relationships were with universities specifically in China and how we might be selling intelligence or making intelligence available to this university in China. And it sounded like such a far reach to me for an Iowa legislator to be asking the president of a private college for this, that I thought, this guy's on the attack. Am I reading him wrong or what? Tell me about him.
He is very much on the attack. So a couple of years ago, the Iowa House leadership decided to separate the regular education committee, which handles K through 12 policy, from the higher education. So they created a separate higher education committee and they put Taylor Collins in charge of it. And I think the first year he was in the legislature, I'm trying to remember if it was an Iowa Public Radio interview or there was some profile of him where he's an Iowa State graduate and has worked primarily in politics throughout his life. He worked in the governor's office and then he was elected to the legislature at a very young age. But he mentioned something about taking a business class in at Iowa State, and they did some unit or classroom discussion about white privilege. And he was very deeply offended. It was clear, like however many years ago this was, this left such a strong and angry impression on him. And I think it's fair to say that he is the main antagonist of higher education in Iowa right now. And I think, and what you didn't mention, but Iowa Capital Dispatch reported a month or two ago that he wrote a letter. Now I'm going to have to look this up at some point that to make sure that I'm getting all the details right. But he wrote to the head of the Association for Private Colleges, and it was kind of a threatening letter. I mean, I was very shocked to see it. And Gary Steinke of the private colleges, I mean, he is really politically cautious. And I was surprised that he even spoke to the media about it. But I think that he probably did because it was such a big overreach by Taylor Collins. So, okay, this is what I'm now calling up. This is a story by Brooklyn Drazy, who's the higher education reporter for Iowa Capital Dispatch, who does an excellent job. Iowa private college officials say a key lawmaker is threatening funding to a state tuition grant program over their opposition to allowing community colleges to offer four-year degrees. So there was a bill that the House approved that would allow certain four-year degree programs to be community colleges. Of course, that's a big threat to private colleges, and the
Sure.
private colleges were lobbying against that. This bill ended up not getting past committee level in the Iowa Senate anyway. But apparently, I mean, if colleges become ineligible for the Iowa tuition grant, it really hurts the colleges, but it also hurts the lower and middle income students. So why would you punish the students over something? I mean, it's just natural that private colleges are going to speak out about a bill that they see as threatening their enrollment. So anyway, Taylor Collins feels really strongly he would like the Southeast Iowa Community College to be able to offer more four-year degree programs. But it was, I mean, to send a letter like this, and I thought that it must have been like a four-alarm fire for Gary Steinke to even speak to a journalist about it, because normally you wouldn't see that. But so Taylor Collins, I mean, he has been the key advocate for a lot of these anti-DEI bills. Many of them affecting state universities have gone forward. The one thing he wasn't able to do was to yank the private colleges, or to say that the private colleges couldn't participate in the Iowa tuition grant if they had DEI offices. That was a bill that they tried to run it as part of a bigger anti-DEI bill last year. The Senate stripped that private college language out of it. This year, the House tried to pass it as a standalone bill, and the Senate, again, the Senate Republicans are just not interested in going after the private colleges. I think one of the key factors here is that Lynn Evans, who is the chair of the Iowa Senate Education Committee, represents a part of Northeast Iowa that includes Storm Lake, of course, BV University, completely essential to the economy of Storm Lake. So I think that he's a little bit sensitive to the needs of private colleges. But I mean, it's interesting to see. I think sometimes about Taylor Collins, and I think about what students of color experience and the microaggressions that they experience on a daily or at least weekly basis at the state universities. And then I think that he's still nursing this grudge over whatever discussion was had about white privilege. It really is quite an overreaction. But he is a very important legislator in this area. And then the chair of the regular Iowa House Education Committee, Skylar Wheeler, has really attacked public K through 12 schools from so many different angles.
Wow.
Sorry, that was a
Explains a
big.
lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. Jim Sears, you had a comment in the chat. Why don't you go ahead and bring it to the group?
Yeah. Hey, first of all, thank you for the organizers of the event last week. I didn't get to go over to Storm Lake, but I got to go to Byron's on Friday night. And what fun to see some of the familiar faces that I didn't even know before this group. So thanks for the people who organized that. My question today, though, Laura, has to do with primaries. Uh,
Mhm.
because in general, I've read kind of different philosophies. Primaries are good for the opponents because they identify the potential negative stuff that will be brought up in the general election. However, primaries also use resources for each candidate. So, particularly in Iowa, we have, I'll say, the U.S. Senate for the Democrats and the governor for the Republicans, primary uh, uh, activities going on. What's your opinion in general about the benefits or the costs maybe of having opponents in the primary and attacks in the primary too?
In general, I am an advocate of competitive primaries. I don't know when Iowa Democrats got so allergic to primaries. I feel like over the last 10 or 20 years, there's been a shift where there's been a drive to try to eliminate competition. And I think most of the time, a competitive primary makes a candidate stronger. And I'll take as the example the 2018 primary in the 3rd congressional district where I live. I would say a year before the primary, probably almost no one had heard of Cindy Axne. She started out in a 7-way primary. It ended up being a 3-way race when you got to who was on the ballot. And she came out of that primary better known. I think she was she was always a good speaker, but I think she was a better candidate and better known because of the work that she had to do to get her name out there in the primary. So I think it's mostly beneficial. I know that some people get worried about the attacks that people are criticizing each other in the primary, but I can assure you that the Republicans already have all of this information about all of the Democratic candidates anyway. So it's not like anything is being said by Josh Turek or Zach Walls that Ashley Hinson and her people don't know about. And I think that airing differences, whether it's differences over public policy or differences in terms of strategy or who's more electable, I think that that's more good than bad. It does use up resources. There's no question about that. I mean, if you have a truly competitive primary, you're probably going to come out of that without that much money in the bank. But I think what we see increasingly in races for the Congress or for the US Senate is that there's so much outside spending that the money lead that one candidate has over another is not as important as it used to be. Because I mean, I'll take the Senate race. Ashley Hinson will have an advantage, but outside groups, if they think that the race is winnable, outside groups are going to come in and spend a ton of money if in on the Senate race anyway. So I don't think it's a big problem. But and I think if you look also at the 2022 race for governor, when Democrats only had Deidre DeGier, and she kind of disappeared for 4 or 5 months. I mean, if you have a primary, the candidate has to be out there more. They're getting media coverage. Maybe there are debates that get coverage, and so I think that that kind of hurt her in the sense of she came out of the primary with still very low name ID statewide.
Makes sense. Hey, Jim, it was great to see you the other night in Pomeroy, and thank you so much for your support for the Iowa Writers Collaborative and so many of the writers. If it weren't for people like you, we wouldn't be able to do this. Laura is a part of the Iowa Down Ballot podcast, which is recorded every Friday during the legislative session, and it's a wealth of information. Dave Price leads it, facilitates it, and Kathy Obradovich of Iowa Capital Dispatch is also on the call. And it's thanks to you all who are able to be in support financially that makes these things happen. So thank you, Jim.
Really
Mark,
fun. We have a lot of fun doing the Iowa Down ballot for sure.
you do, you do. It's fun to listen to. All right, Martha Wolf, you're up next.
I was just commenting on Taylor Collins is absolutely the golden boy for the Republican Party. He's good looking. His grandfather started Tri Oaks, so he's got lots of financial backing. And I see them putting him up for, everything that imaginable, governor or senator or whatever. No one cares to run against him because it's such a strong place he holds. I would just ask Laura, you mentioned Schuyler Wheeler, and I'm wondering where his amendment on the library obscenity bill that he's added to the the city public health bill that made it, but the library obscenity bill didn't. So he added that amendment. Is that going to move forward?
So there were 6 or 7 bad library bills, and most of the provisions or several of the provisions from those were rolled into one big amendment that, as you mentioned, Schuyler Wheeler added to this other local government bill. I have not seen that on the debate calendar. My impression is that these other library bills were not brought to the floor of the Iowa House because they didn't have support to pass. And so that makes me think that it's not likely that this amendment, this local public health department bill with this big library amendment would pass. But I think it's always good to be wary and to be vigilant. Also, there were companion bills to some of those library measures in the Senate, and none of those got through the funnel in the Senate. So I would be cautiously optimistic that if somehow that does get through the House, I just don't know whether the Senate would take it up. The House in general, the House passes a lot more bills than the Senate does. I mean, the Senate passes some things that they send over to the House that the House doesn't advance, but the much more common pattern is that the House passes something and the Senate doesn't move it forward. I mean, that the Senate is just more selective, let's say, about these bills. And I got the impression earlier this year that Senate Majority Leader Mike Klimisch had a media availability. I think it was the first, I can't remember if it was the first or the second funnel, but I asked him what he thought about the library bills. And I thought his answer was pretty encouraging because he said something like, I think we have to be really careful whenever we're doing something about libraries. Or, it wasn't very specific, but he definitely wasn't like one of these fire breathing, we've got to punish the public library people.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Tim Grover, and then I'm going to go to Iowa Writers Collaborative member Lyle Muller, who plays a mean banjo. But Tim, you're first.
Hi, Laura. I was wondering who you see as the biggest primary challenger for Feenstra. Been seeing a few other commercials for some of his challengers. Also, if you had have been invited to the press fiasco thing on Saturday night and you were in DC, would you have gone?
I would not have gone to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I think it was a mistake for most of those people to be there. I'm glad no one was hurt there. But I think inviting Trump when he's attacking the press in 100 different ways was just the wrong move for the Correspondents Association. And I think it's kind of a weird event anyway. I feel like it's always been a little bit of a weird event. I mean, many reporters, I'm friendly with some politicians, but I just feel like that level of chumminess, I don't know, is probably not the right move for reporters. But in terms of the Feenstra, I got to tell you, this Republican primary for governor is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in Iowa politics. So it's 5 Republicans on the ballot. Feenstra, the favorite, probably because of his name recognition, but he is the worst front runner candidate for a major office in Iowa that I've ever seen. I mean, just a terrible candidate on every level. And so I feel like one on one against several of these people, he would be in trouble. But fortunately for him, he's up against 4 people, and 2 of them, Eddie Andrews and Brad Sherman, have kind of minimal fundraising. Brad Sherman has some endorsements, but they're probably not the threats. But I feel like Adam Steen and Zach Lane are the biggest threats to each other because Zach Lane is self-funding. He's put at least $2 million of his own money into his campaign. He's got a bunch of ads, and he's saying some unusual things that I think get people's attention because you don't hear Republican candidates talking about corporate monopoly power and big ag lying to you and all this stuff. So it's kind of interesting, but I don't know how much support there is in today's Republican Party for that. And then you have Steen, who has this old Christian conservative, social conservative network, the Bob Vanderplots people, the family leader, and that can get you fairly far, right? It worked for Mike Huckabee, it worked for Ted Cruz and Rick Santorum, but a statewide primary that could have high turnout, I mean, significantly higher turnout than what we would see in the Iowa caucuses. I don't know that there are enough of those people. I don't really see either Steen or Lane consolidating enough support and overtaking Feenstra. But on the other hand, then every time I hear Feenstra say something, I'm just thinking he's such a bad candidate. So I don't know what is going to happen. I would say more likely than not, it's Feenstra. But even in his own campaign's poll, he was only at 41%, which is not that great considering the other people are barely known. So I guess
Well,
your guess is as good as mine on that one.
I know just driving around Iowa, the signs that you do see up, I don't see any Feenstra signs. I see
Mhm.
signs for the other guys, but for whatever
Yeah.
that's worth.
Well, I
So
heard,
thank you.
and I heard several people say that driving up to Storm Lake, they saw a lot of Adam Steen signs. Of course, the Christian conservative, it is a powerful voting bloc, and Northwest Iowa is where a lot of them are located. But Sherman, Lane, and Steen are all going for those voters, and so I think it would be easier if it were one-on-one race. And I should have mentioned that Steve King endorsed Zach Lane, so I think he would like the other candidates to get out of the race and rally around Zach Lane. I don't think that there's any chance of that happening. And the family leader, the network of churches and people who are involved with those and homeschoolers, Adam Steen has said he wants to expand the school voucher program to include homeschoolers. So that could be popular with people. So I think that they both have a decent block of support, but I just don't know if it's enough to keep Feenstra below 35%, which is what he needs to win the primary. And if nobody gets 35% in the primary and it goes to state convention, then I just have no idea. Because I would have said Adam Steen probably has a little bit of an advantage because among the state convention delegates, but really hard to say.
Thanks, Tim. Good question. All right, Lyle
Okay,
Muller,
thank
and then
you.
we're going to go to Barb Leach and Connie Taylor. Lyle?
There were a few bills floating around in this session, like in every session, about public notices for meetings. which
Right.
raised the eyebrows of folks at the Iowa Newspaper Association. The Newspaper Association was getting ready to do an onslaught about the value of publishing notices in newspapers right about the time that 19 newspapers closed, which caused a course correction from
Did
newspaper
most of them
folks.
didn't most of them find buyers at the last minute?
They did. Yeah, a lot of effort was made, and also the Iowa Newspaper Association is raising bridge money to
Mhm.
help support, and I've donated to that. But what's happened with all of these bills and what's been going on? I haven't heard squat about them in some time.
No, I have been, I don't know that any of them are still live wires. I think that some of them got through the first funnel, but I don't think any of them ever got out of one chamber or the other. But I couldn't say for sure that they're dead because I don't know whether any of them ended up on the unfinished business calendar where like dozens of bills are hanging out and most of them won't get called up, but leadership could call them up. Those bills are introduced every year, and I feel that if they had majority support, they would have passed already. I don't know exactly, though, who are the champions of the newspapers who keep arguing in caucus behind closed doors against bringing those bills to the floor. But I perceive that there must be some people in both the House and the Senate who are carrying that banner because, as you know better than I do, that, 100 or more newspapers would just close immediately if they didn't have the public notices. And there are
Yeah,
still a lot of people who don't have internet. I mean, I think that some people forget if you use the internet all the time, there are a lot of people who don't have an internet connection or don't have a computer, don't know how to use it. And so it is important. A lot of people still rely on those newspapers.
and there's always the argument of pushing information and pulling information. I think, I'm curious too how this dies within the caucus because it seems like individuals bring up stuff, and then there are some of the same individuals. But I would suggest that part of this might rest in the fact that a lot of these county newspapers are run by Republicans.
Yeah, oh
They're
yeah.
pro-business Republicans and
And
community-minded people.
and these weeklies, they publish, the legislators write these weekly newsletter columns, and many of them are published in the local newspaper, and they probably like having that,
Yeah,
I would
I
guess.
agree.
No, there are a lot of newspapers that are, I mean, the majority of newspapers, I think, are probably conservative
By the
in
way,
orient.
Lyle is heading this new initiative with the Iowa Writers Collaborative called the Emerging Journalist Corps, and it's very exciting. And so, Lyle, thank you. Tip of the hat to you. And who knew you could play the guitar and the banjo? So, thank you.
Well, I left my mandolin at home. That's the little secret.
You have a mandolin too. Anyway, thank you so much. All right, let's see. Connie Taylor, then Barb Leach.
Laura, first of all, I want to say thank you and how much we appreciate all the work that you do on all of this and keeping us so informed. Um, and I always watch you on the down ballot, and truly, I don't know how you keep all this in your head. You are awesome. You
Mm-hmm.
truly are. My question is, and you guys talk about this on the down ballot, is how in the Iowa legislature, the two, the Senate and the House, they disagree with each other all the time. And I'm like, aren't they on the same side? Or is it like siblings where you're there, but you just can't help fighting with each other? I mean, what? I don't understand that. I've always been curious about that.
I don't know. I mean, there's a long history of that. Jennifer Conforst said one time in one of her speeches on the House floor, her father, Mike Glover, was an AP State House reporter for decades. And when she became the House Minority Leader, she recounted that he said to her, "Remember that the Republicans are your opponents, but your enemies are the Iowa Senate." And that there just is an antagonism. I was talking with someone who was involved he was at the staff level. He was involved during the Democratic trifecta years, which there were only four. And he said that there was this every year it just got worse and worse. They did a lot of things together, but there would be these what seemed to us maybe minor disagreements between the House and the Senate. And it led to some real antagonism. And like I said, we're now in the 10th year of a Republican trifecta. So I'm sure that part of it, there are maybe personalities that play into it, but I think that the institutions, for whatever reason, they have very different priorities. The House has wanted to pass a lot more of some of these school related or higher education bills than the Senate's interested in. Historically, there have been a few bills. The Senate passed the pesticide immunity bill twice that the House Republicans just had no interest in taking up. And so, I mean, from my perspective, I'm glad that they don't work well, work even better together, because I feel like they
Yeah.
already pass a lot of harmful bills and they would pass even more. But like one example this year that I was very relieved to see is that the Senate proposed they passed a bill that included codifying Medicaid privatization, which would mean that even if Rob Sand were elected governor, he wouldn't be able to undo Medicaid privatization, which would just be a complete disaster. He's promised that on day one he'll start the process of trying to unroll that. Well, anyways, it turned out the House Republicans have no interest in codifying Medicaid privatization. So I don't know all of the reasons, but I was very relieved to see that. So it's it's strange. I mean, I was talking with someone last week about the property tax things. The property tax bills are so different between the House and the Senate Republicans. It's not like on the budget or school funding where the House come in at this number and the Senate come in at that number and they can meet in the middle. It's just like a totally different approach. So I don't know what they're going to do. There's still a lot of House members who are resentful about what happened with eminent domain bills in the Senate. So I don't know where it all started, but it is real. It's not like Kabuki theater. There is real hostility between the House and the Senate Republicans.
Okay, thanks. Great question, Barb Leach, and then we're going to go to Iowa Writers Collaborative member Bob Leonard.
Well, my question, I think I read in your, well, first let me just say thank you to you, Julie, and to you, Laura. I think you're both amazing, and how you juggle all those balls is beyond me. But I have this question about what I think I read in one of your columns recently, Laura, and that is that Zach raised some crypto money, something like $250,000, and somehow that money landed in the state party's coffers, and then the crypto company went broke, and that left the state party with $200,000 worth of debt. So I would say, one, I don't know why anybody would want to touch crypto money for campaign kinds of things, because it certainly is risky and more controversial. But do I remember that
So I
right?
think you read about that in Bob Leonard's column, probably, because I haven't written about it yet, although
Oh,
I will write about it in a forthcoming column. But to give people some background, in 2022, when Zach Walz was the Iowa Senate Minority Leader, he raised a lot of money, and one of the largest contribution was $250,000 from an executive at that FTX corporation. So it wasn't Sam Bankman-Fried, but it was somebody else. And it came into the Iowa Democratic Party because the Iowa Democratic Party has different buckets of money. They have the Senate Majority Fund, which supports the Senate Democrats. They have the House Truman Fund that supports the House Democrats. And then there are other pots of money. So in any case, it went to the Iowa Democratic Party. And I think that I've never heard anyone speculate or suggest that Zach Walz knew that there was anything crooked about this company or the money. I mean, the FTX people were giving large contributions to lots of Democratic candidates around the country. But where I think is a more serious issue is that when the fraud, everything unraveled at that company, and a number of people were charged with fraud. And I think that the person who actually gave this contribution may have been a cooperating witness for the federal government. But a number of Democratic candidates gave that money back or donated it to charity, whatever they had received. But Zach Walz didn't. So they basically hung on to the money in his position. When I asked him about this last summer, when I interviewed him, he said, well, we were victims of the fraud just like everybody else. But he didn't take steps to deal with that donation. Then in the summer of 2023, he was ousted as minority leader. So then it was kind of like somebody else's problem. And eventually, the federal government wanted the money back, I guess. And so there eventually some settlement was reached with the Iowa Democratic Party. So now the party is carrying $200,000 of debt from this donation. That I don't think that the money was raised in bad faith, but there were Democrats who were much more prompt in dealing with it. after the FTX people were charged.
Okay, thanks. Great question.
Apologies to Robert Leonard for not giving you credit, but thank you very much, Laura. I really do enjoy all your column.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barb. Bob Leonard, speaking of.
Well, thank you, Barbara. If you confuse my work with Laura's, that's a compliment. So that's great. I wish much of it was as good as Laura's. I think she explained the situation very well. And actually, it was brought up. I published a comment by Andy Kopsa, and it was investigative journalist, and it was Andy that laid that out. Um, so anyway, thank you, and thank you, Laura. It was good to see several people here over the weekend. That was nice. I wanted to ask you, Laura, about the um, Secretary of Ag race.
Mhm.
What do you think of that?
Well, I was kind of looking forward to the primary. So Wade Dooley ended up not filing for the primary. I thought it would have been very interesting to see him and Chris Jones campaign against each other, and I thought that that would probably sharpen both of them. But so now it's an uncontested Democratic primary, so it's going to be Chris Jones against Mike Naig. And Chris Jones is very clear that this he's going to make this race a referendum on clean water. If you think our water is fine, vote for the other guy. And if you think we need to do more to clean up our water, vote for me because the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship could be doing more than it's doing. And I think it's going to be a really interesting race. I mean, it's always difficult to run against an incumbent, and the statewide voter registration numbers are really terrible. And I'm sure that the big ag are going to throw a lot of money at Chris Jones because he's said a lot of inflammatory things like we've got to get rid of ethanol and whatever he said. And he's got a whole book that he wrote plus Substack posts that he's regularly writing that I'm sure they'll throw at him. But he's very knowledgeable about all these topics. So I think it's going to be interesting. And I think anything that raises the salience of clean water as an issue is not a bad thing. And I just wanted to I saw there was a question in the chat from Tim Grover. Are there any Republicans proposing any solutions to clean up our water? And I would say not very many, but one who I think has tried a little bit is Jason Gearhart. He is a new first term House Republican from way up in Northeast Iowa. And he introduced a good bill on buffer strips that didn't go anywhere. And then he had another bill that was funding. I'm trying to remember what it was, something that didn't go anywhere. But I think that there are a handful, but there just aren't very many Republicans who are willing to push this issue. And that's why we don't get anywhere at the State House on it.
Okay, thanks. Kathy Moore. By the way, Kathy, just on a personal note, I'm so sorry you lost your sister.
Oh, thank you. She was special. Thanks.
I'm sorry.
Laura, I have been yelling at my phone a lot lately, and it's because it seems like every time I click on some of my favorite progressives on YouTube, before I get to them, I get this ad from Marionette Miller Meeks, and I haven't even looked up to see what she's done. I just yell at her. And it's one of those ads that it won't let you click off after 5 seconds, so I have to sit through the whole thing. Says that she has done so much in healthcare, and I just yell, "You lie!" What are they basing this on?
Well, first of all, I'm going to ask a favor of you. Next time you see that ad, can you jot down at the end? It should say "paid for by" because
I will.
I'm wondering if that was actually paid for by Miller Meeks for Congress, or it could be some outside group like the House Republicans. It could be the National Republican Congressional Committee or some other group. The American Action Fund is a group that has sometimes spent money on behalf of Miller Meeks. So I would love to know who is spending all that money on all those YouTube ads. So,
I will check that out because it's coming on again and again and again. They're putting a ton of money into it.
Right. Well, YouTube has identified you as a voter who lives in Iowa. So there you go. That's why the algorithm got you. So I don't know. I haven't seen those ads. I think that when I hear her talk about healthcare, of course, she says that she's tried to do stuff about pharmacy benefit managers. That's something that she and Chuck Grassley both talk a good game on that. She and Zach Nunn and Ashley Hinson all talk about this rural healthcare fund from the big beautiful bill. And it's like
right.
It's a joke. I mean, Iowa's going to lose like $8 or $9 billion in Medicaid funding, and then this rural healthcare fund is going to be like $1 billion over 5 years. So I mean, it's not that the money won't go toward anything useful, but I can't remember who said this to me. It's like somebody handing you a Band-Aid after they just punched you in the face. It's like, I mean, to say that they've done great things for healthcare, but she has gotten some earmarked funding. So I don't know exactly what those ads say, but she has her line. They're still claiming falsely that the Medicaid cuts are actually going to preserve and strengthen Medicaid for the people who really need it. It's not true, but that's their story and they're sticking to it. So that's probably what they're saying. And they're taking advantage of the fact that she is a doctor. So I think in a lot of people's minds, a doctor is someone they could trust on healthcare. So I did notice a month or two ago that the OBGYN PAC, which has endorsed Miller Meeks in the past, they came out and endorsed Christina Bohannon this year. And one of the big reasons was those Medicaid cuts in that reconciliation bill, the so-called one big beautiful bill, which they now are trying to rebrand as the working families tax cut, which it also
Right.
isn't. But in any case, that's their story. But yeah, I'd love to know who's actually paying for those ads. Gabby.
Okay, thanks so much. Carl Schilling, you're up next.
Oh, I just wanted to know your take on the Nate Willems, Brenna Bird thing. And by the way, I spelled it right, but AI changed it.
I'm so interested in the Attorney General race. So both the Republican Attorney General Association and the Democratic Attorney General Association are targeting Iowa's race as highly competitive. And Nate Willems recently announced that he'd raised $1 million, which is a lot for a challenger against an incumbent. I don't know what people's internal polls are showing of that race, but anecdotally, I've heard that Brenna Bird's favorables are very low. That's why she didn't get the Trump endorsement to run for governor, which she clearly was hoping to do last spring. She was obviously auditioning for Trump's endorsement. For whatever reason, that didn't happen. And I wrote something in November. I was fascinated by this. One of these outside groups, it was some conservative group that I had never heard of before and haven't seen any activity from since. But they posted something on their Twitter account, which had like 4 followers and 2 posts. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on TV ads promoting Brenna Bird. Not election, not vote for Brenna Bird, but just saying nice things about all the work that she's done. And then they did polling before and after their ad campaign, and they published this polling memo that showed that their ad campaign really helped and improved her poll numbers, so basically it was like an advertisement. I viewed it as their pitch to try to get clients for the election year, where they were putting out this polling memo to say, look how effective our ad campaign was. But what was amazing was that even after the ad campaign, she was tied with Nate Willems. They were tied at, I think, 41% or 42%. And her favorables were still underwater even after this ad campaign. And that was in a Republican group's poll. So, and I can't imagine that even 5% of Iowans know who Nate Willems is yet. So if a poll is showing 41% say they would vote for Nate Willems, that's just people saying, I don't support Brenna Bird. So that's why I think that race is going to be very competitive, even though, all other things being equal, an incumbent is always favored, and the Republicans would be favored because of their voter registration advantage. But I think that Brenna Bird's favorability is a real weak spot. And so I expect to see a lot of positive ads trying to get her. I mean, I think there are already maybe some positive ads going digitally anyway, to try to get people to have a favorable impression of her. But I'm very interested. Nate Willems, he's a labor attorney from Lynn County, and he is running, well, I guess he's originally from Jones County, but he lives in Lynn County. And he's running an interesting campaign focused on making the Attorney General's office work for Iowans and focusing on issues that matter to working Iowans and prosecuting things like wage theft and workers' comp violations and things that he says things like, if you sell your labor by the hour, you should get paid for every hour that you work. And I'm going to make sure that happens instead of spending all of the time and resources that Brenna Bird spends getting involved with all of these federal multi-state cases, whether it was suing against Biden administration policies, now it's like suing and filing briefs in support of Trump's policies, and his pitch is going to be that he's going to focus the AG's office to work on issues that matter to Iowans. And I think that if he can raise the money to get that message out, I think it's potentially a really good message.
Great question. All right, thanks. Bill Staplin. And yeah, there you go.
Hi, Laura.
We were high school classmates,
Were
everyone.
you? Oh,
Yeah.
you're the Valley High School group.
Yep.
Okay.
Laura looks much younger than I do. Yes. Regarding the obstetrics and OBGYN facilities, right now, basically half of the counties have OB units, which is terrible. And obviously, everybody knows that Iowa's got the lowest per capita OBGYNs per 10,000 women in the state within the reproductive age. So my question is this, regarding following up with your talk with maybe it was Kathy's question, but with oh yeah, it was with Miller Meeks talking about that. First of all, which really bothers me, she's an ophthalmologist, and she was against. She was all for this concept of conception, life at conception bill, and so forth. But she doesn't support Medicaid, and that's a problem. I'm glad to hear that the OBGYNs are not, going with her. Is that OBGYN, these deserts that are being created in Iowa, is that going to be another focus for the other, like, for example, Sarah Trungariat and District 2 and well, I'm not sure who's going up in District 4 against the Republicans, but that seems to be such a critical, I mean, with the Medicaid cuts, like you mentioned, losing 8 to 9 billion because of the one big beautiful bill. That should, I don't know. I harp back at that, and I think, why aren't people talking about that more? And maybe they will. I don't know.
Okay.
I think they will be. I think they are. And I know I've heard Christina Bohannon talk about this issue. I've heard her repeatedly talk about how Fort Madison, a city of almost 10,000 people, I think is losing their only OBGYN is retiring. They were unable to recruit someone to replace that person. So that's going to be another desert. Just this spring, Mercy One, or no, I'm sorry, was it Mercy One or was it a different provider? They're closing labor and delivery in Clinton. So Clinton is going to be a city of about 24,000 people in the first district, where to have a baby, women are going to have to drive to either Davenport or Dubuque, which is a long drive, 45 minutes to an hour. And that is absolutely an issue that I've heard Christina Bohannon talk about, and I'm sure she will continue to. And Rob Sand has talked about that quite a bit in running for governor. And I've heard him also put that in the context. Not only are the federal Medicaid cuts terrible on that, but these abortion ban policies that Republicans have passed at the state level are driving doctors out of the state. And I have heard him talk about that. I expect that we will hear more about that. I don't think it's his centerpiece issue, but it's certainly something he talks about regularly, and it should be. And I know Sarah Trungariat, I mean, she's already done, she did a healthcare roundtable in Ottumwa because Mercy One closed their family or an internal medicine clinic there, which forces people to drive to Centerville, which is like 45 minutes away.
Okay, great question, Bill. Thanks. Mary, you're up next.
I'll pick up a lot of things, but let me just tie into what Laura's talking about. So Secretary of State race. There is a candidate for against Pate. His name is Ryan Peterman, and he's got a great story. He's a retired Navy, and I think he might give Paul Pate a little bit run for his money. Paul Pate is talking kind of anti what Trump is saying about these election reform. He came out with a statement last week about, we do a great job in Iowa, blah, blah, blah. Well, yes and no, but I just think that may be a competitive race as well.
Yeah, I think, if the governor's race, I mean, if Rob Sand manages to win the governor's race, then the hope for Democrats is that that would have coattails for all of the races down ballot. And I think that traditionally, Republicans have had higher turnout in midterm elections than Democrats. But this year, let's say Feenstra is their nominee, the base is not excited about him. Ashley Hinson is a stronger candidate, but I don't know if she's a candidate who can really drive their turnout. And so if Republican turnout really collapses, I mean, I have a Republican contact who every time I talk to this person, they say 1974, which is really funny because I mean, you would think like the Democrats would be bringing up 1974, but if it is a 1974 type election and the bottom drops out, there could be a lot of races that are more competitive than people are expecting. I wanted to mention there's another question in the chat from Tim about is it wise for GOP candidates to keep running ads showing them with Trump? Keep in mind that they're in a Republican primary. So, yes, the Republican base still largely supports Trump. So, yes, they have to keep pandering. But in the general election, I think we'll see fewer ads of Republicans showing themselves with Trump. Although, if they're worried about base turnout, maybe they'll do more things with Trump. I was very surprised to see that JD Vance is coming here to campaign with Zach Nunn this week. If I were Zach Nunn, that's the last person I would want to do an event with. But it made me think that they might be really worried about the MAGA base and how do they get those people to actually show up and give money to Zach Nunn.
All right, thanks, Ralph Rosenberg. I've got you up next, but you'll need to turn your microphone on. You ready?
Oh, sure. Well, thanks again, Laura. What do you think about the respective campaign strategies right now? I mean, do you think that the Republicans are starting to shift away from Trump and to redirect, or do you think that the legislature and the campaign ads are just all going to go in full board to Trump now, or do you think after the primaries they'll start moving to the center? Do you have a sense?
I think they try to say a lot of Republicans try to say very little about Trump. I mean, I think people are embarrassed. I mean, his Easter Sunday posts, let's say, I tried to ask Adam Steen about that because his digital ad identifies him as a pro-Trump Christian conservative. So I asked him to comment on some of Trump's recent social media posts, including the Easter Sunday one, the one threatening to destroy Iranian civilization, and his attacks on Pope Leo. And Adam Steen said, I'm not going to comment on the president's social media. So I think that they're not always as loud and proud. And I think that after the primary, I mean, Feenstra right now, of course, he wants everybody to think he's so close to Trump and he's done everything with Trump. He didn't even endorse Trump before the Iowa caucuses. So I don't know if MAGA is going to really buy that. But if he's the nominee, I don't know. If he's smart, I would say he shouldn't campaign heavily with Trump because the evidence I've seen is that Trump is underwater on popularity, even in Iowa, a state he carried by 17 or by 13. So, if he's not if he's not in positive territory on approval, that's got to be pretty worrying for the Republicans. But I don't think we're going to see Republicans turn around and denounce Trump because they can't do that. The MAGA base still has this very cult-like dedication. And I noticed, I don't know if anybody reads the Iowa Standard website. Jacob Hall is a conservative, a guy, and he was a Trumper, big MAGA guy. He doesn't like Feenstra. And he has been, he posted something. It was after I think it was, okay, he posted the Easter Sunday post, and then it was something else where he just posted a screenshot of what Trump posted. And he just posted that screenshot on his Facebook page with no commentary. And he was immediately swarmed by people, MAGA people, saying that it was all lies and it was fake and Trump never said that. And he is a Trump guy himself who bought into all of these lies about the stolen election. But he posted about this saying that this is not healthy for our movement, that he didn't even say anything negative about the posts. He just put them out there. But people perceive anything negative that they see about Trump, they immediately think it's just like liberals lying. And so I think that Republicans are in a bind, right? They can't really distance themselves from anything. And the conspiracy mindset has really taken hold with the Republican base. It's why you see Adam Steen, ludicrously talking about banning Sharia law in Iowa, like as if that's something we need to worry about. But it's because of these conspiracy theories that are are popular with part of their base. So I don't know. They've gotten a long way on Trump's coattails, but maybe this will be the year that it starts to work against them.
Thank you so much. Now, Laura, if you were to list the top 5 closest legislative races in both the House and the Senate, who would come to mind?
So in the Senate, there are 3 that are obviously going to be very competitive. Ankeny Senate seat, it's an open seat because the incumbent Mike Busolo is running away to run in a safer Republican seat. So that's an open seat where Heather Mattson, who's a member of the Iowa House now, is going to be the Democratic nominee. I think Caitlin Dray up in Sioux City and Mike Zimmer over in Clinton County, North Scott County, Maquoketa area, they were special election winners who flipped red seats last year. So those are going to be highly contested Senate seats. And in the House, I think that some of the most competitive House races are going to be right here in Polk County. Heather Sievers running against the incumbent Bill Gustoff. That would be a rematch from last year. That's the district that includes Altoona and parts of eastern Polk County. I think the Johnston district in the northwest suburbs that Eddie Andrews is vacating to run for governor, that's going to be highly competitive. I think that David Young's district in Dallas County could be competitive, although he's probably favored. I think that David Young is just one of those people with a solid Republican voting record, but he doesn't project as offensive as some of the other Republicans do. So, but I think that that's going to be highly competitive. And I'm trying to think. I mean, there are a lot of the Marshalltown, Iowa House race, where there's a first-term Republican, David Blom, who defeated a Democratic incumbent last year, and the Democratic candidate is going to be the former police chief. That's going to be a really close race, I think. And then in Dubuque, the part of Dubuque that used to be represented by Chuck Eisenhart that Republican Jennifer Smith represents now, I think that will be a top target as well. So I gave you more than you asked for there.
No, that's great. So Laura Belin is an example of what is happening in this day and age in reaction to the shrinking of legacy media. She's working her tail off covering these issues, and as you can tell, she knows what she's talking about. She does not take advertising. She does not accept paid subscriptions from candidates. So if you have it in your heart to support what Laura Belin is doing one way or the other, how can they do that, Laura?
So I have Substack, of course, where people can become a paying subscriber, but I also have a credit card donation page where people can make either a one-time gift or recurring gifts of any amount. I have Patreon, I have Venmo, I have PayPal. I just try to meet people where they are. Or, if people want to send me a check, I can give them the address. And yeah, I decided that to avoid perceived conflicts of interest, that I wouldn't take money from elected officials, candidates, or paid campaign staff or consultants, which I feel good about the policy, but those are also like hundreds of my readers who I can't take money from. And so, and I even return donations when sometimes people who don't know about my policy will send me money. So in any case, I'm grateful. I don't believe in paywalls for my reporting. So I'm really grateful to the people who do voluntarily donate, because that helps me keep everything free for everybody else.
Thank you, Laura, so much for everything you do and for popping on the call today. We'll do it more often. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And after the primary would be fun to talk about the races again.
Oh, sounds great.
Okay,
thanks. Iowa Down Ballot. Be sure and subscribe to Iowa Down Ballot too, where you'll find Laura and Dave Price and Kathy Obranovich. Take care, everybody.
Yep.